Members of Parliament have described this year's municipal audit outcomes as worrisome due to a regression in clean audits. Auditor-General Tsakani Maluleke presented the findings to Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts earlier yesterday. While the outcomes indicate a reduction in the number of disclaimers, the AG says more needs to be done to eradicate these audits. For more on this now, we are now joined by Program Manager at the Public Service Accountability Monitor, Zukiswa Kota, and Zamo Gwala, who is SALGA's Acting Chief Officer at the Municipal Finance Office. Of course, they are joining us via our Zoom lines. Thank you so much for joining us, Zamo Gwala and Zukiswa Kota. It really is certainly, something that is quite important for our country to highlight the importance of municipal finances in this country. Of course, quite alarming, that report we saw indeed from the AG just yesterday. Zamo, I'm going to start with you. Of course, we saw yesterday the AG basically saying that wasteful and fruitless expenditure amounting to 4.74 billion rand. This is quite problematic, especially in a country like ours, which is crying for service delivery.
Certainly, as SALGA, we have noted the report coming from AG. We are equally concerned about those numbers because they are very high, and it's not something that any one of us can be excited about. But having looked at what is coming through, we agree with and noted the fact that the number of clean audit decreased. But if you look at that number, as well as the number of unqualified audit, we note that those two, they make about 55% of 257 municipalities. So the point that we are making is that as much as we are concerned, but we are comforted that almost 67% of the municipal budget is governed by that 55% of municipalities that are getting reasonably good kind of feedback. However, we want to emphasize the point that really, as the leadership of municipalities, there are areas that require attention. One is that both at political and administrative leadership, we need to improve the way that we are managing and providing the consequence management of these things. And above that, the issue of skills, both at management of the finance and general management of municipality, where we talk about municipal managers, there are vacancies that remain unfilled for quite a lot of time. So we are encouraging the municipalities to actually fill those positions because the numbers that we are talking about are a result of not having the right people in those positions.
And Zuki, I'd like for you to weigh in on this. What does this speak to when we see such reports coming out from the AG of fruitless expenditure in our communities?
Yeah. Thanks, Buddy. I mean, I think a really important point that was raised by the AG in, both the report and in, as you mentioned, her tabling of the report in Parliament was the fundamental aspects of what it means for a community in terms of service delivery, where there is failure of accounting officers to fulfill their duties. So one really important thing, and just to say, I mean, our organization is across various countries, but is based in the Eastern Cape, in Makanda, where many people might be aware of our recent water issues. Very good timing, I see the images, but where, I think both when we reflect very recently on the cholera outbreak, that happened in Hammanskraal, devastating losses in lives. And I think that it's really high time that those links were made between what it means when municipal officials, and in particular accounting officers, fail to fulfill their duties in procurement, in governance, and in performance, which is what the AG highlighted in the report, what that means at the end of the day, and water contamination, water pollution, lack of access to adequate water as a fundamental human right. Those are some of the issues that were highlighted. And so for us as an organization, and for many who work in the space around social justice and access to services and service delivery, it certainly is really, I think it's encouraging on the one hand for the AG to really make those links and highlight that. But on the other hand, devastating that we're still sitting in a context where we are talking about a vast majority of municipalities, in some cases, in some provinces, where failure to, one, procurement failures, unfair procurement processes are resulting in inadequate service delivery. I say inadequate, but I mean suboptimal. There are likely more descriptive words that should be used to describe what it actually looks like at the end of the day when people do not have access to water, where people are lining up to fill buckets just to have access to clean water in their houses in 2023.
And Zamo, you've also alluded to the issues when it comes to the issues facing municipalities, be it skills, being the problems of filling of vacancies, but also looking at the reality here. We've seen an increase of wasteful expenditure. We know in the previous year it was at 1.96 billion rand, now moving up to 4.74 billion rand. Why is this still being allowed? Why do we continue to see this and no one is being held accountable?
Yeah, certainly the point that I made, really the issue of holding people accountable, because it's not something that we as a country generally we can sustain. I mean, we have made a point that the issue of those funds not going to where they're supposed to be going, they are creating a gap, and that gap is visible all around. So as SALCA, really, we are continuously calling upon the leadership to do their part. But above just calling upon them, we also take a step of actually training them. If you look at the numbers, really, at the political leadership of municipality, after the last elections, 70% of the councillors are relatively new. They were coming into municipalities for the first time. So as SALCA, we provide a capacity building where we help them to understand what their role is. One critical element that talks to that is that they have to provide an oversight. We talk about consequence management, which comes later. But what is important is that that oversight is provided continuously. We don't have to wait until the problem is identified. So we always focus on the political leadership because they have a responsibility. But I must add that the political leadership without an administrative becomes a futile exercise. So it's equally important that we fill up the vacancies and we actually train those people to actually do their work correctly, because one cannot do without the other. We need both politically as well as administrative leadership to be trained and also to do what they're supposed to do. There is another element, obviously, that goes into it, the corruption. We know that it's also another seriously contributing factor to the problems that we have. That's why we continuously call upon leadership to say, identify those people, follow all the regulations that are set. But once people have been identified, they need to feel the might of the law. Because once we continue doing things as we have been doing in the past, we are not going to be able to solve this problem. We have to take it seriously and we have to do our part. Hence, we call upon our leadership to really be serious about consequence management.
And Zuki, Zamo speaks a lot about corruption and accountability here. But one would say that money is being spent here for services. But the reality on the ground is that communities are not receiving any of those services. There's little to no service delivery in many communities. Surely something needs to be done about the sheer corruption we see in municipalities.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the point you raise is a really important one. I'd like to maybe focus on two aspects of it. The first being something that, the Office of the AG has raised, both in the term of AG Maluleke and before that, which is around really building partnerships, both within the ecosystem of political leadership and administrative leadership. And I think absolutely Zamo's point around both aspects being fundamental or being of significance is, I agree with that entirely. But one of the things that I think in terms of emphasis has been coming through is around this notion of an accountability ecosystem, where not just those that are audited and those that do the audits, and then those that are performing oversight duties. So in this case, for example, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, or various other committees in Parliament, or even Kota. But that there are also opportunities for citizens and civic actors to play where there are failures, where there is dereliction of duties. So that's the one aspect where I think it is important that more and more people become aware of this emphasis on an ecosystem of actors. So and here the AG has placed emphasis on the role of civil society, for instance, civic movements, community-based organizations, in providing information about what actually is happening on the ground. On the one hand, we have IDPs, which are meant to do certain things, which proclaim plans of municipalities, and then the question is what actually is then delivered. And I think it's really encouraging to hear from the AG's office that they are seeing the importance of reaching out to those who are at the receiving end of services. The second point then is really in reflecting on what it means for people to be held to account. So on the one hand, we hear a lot about lack of capacity at the municipal level, about vacant posts, and I think those are really, really important things to reflect on. Why are these posts vacant? Why are there such significant vacancies? But perhaps another question in relation to that is, what would it mean to kind of deepen professionalization of the local government space? And I know that SALGA has done amazing work in this space, both in terms of capacity building and in direct engagement of municipalities. But from where we stand, and certainly in our work around accountability, around transparency, around capacity building and related issues, there is still this question of, this far into our democratic period, having so much research. There is a lot of research into the local government space. There is an amazing amount of capacity building. The National Treasury has, if we were to count the interventions, I'm sure we would get tired of counting the interventions that have been made into the local government space. So I think one of the questions is then, so what really is the problem? What are the issues? And the governance, each AG's report comes back to governance and leadership. And I think really we can talk about the outcomes, we can talk about the statistics, we can talk about the big numbers and the big money that's lost. But the bottom line really comes back to, in every single municipality, governance and leadership.
And of course,
and we can't get away from that.
All right. And of course, coming back to you, Zamo, we hear there, Zuki, talking about, we can go on and on and on about the numbers every year. What needs to be done now going forward so that in the next coming years, we don't find ourselves having the same conversation around service delivery and, of course, this fruitless and wasteful expenditure continuing to increase?
Yeah. No, certainly Zukiswa is correct. We are talking about the institutions here. One thing that becomes easier is to identify one problem and say this is the cause. But really, for municipalities to improve, we need to build institutions. And the institutions got different pillars. Our program that we run at SALGA, we call it a MASP, which is a Municipal Audit Support Program. It operates from 4 legs, really. Obviously, financial management is key, but the issue of leadership is equally important. And it also talks about the capacity building. And more importantly, it talks about building the institutions. It's important for us to understand that building institutions, it then says there's not one element that is more important than the other. But those 2 elements that Zukiswa has raised, the issue of leadership and governance, if we can get those 2 right, certainly we will be in the right direction. It's tiring, and I agree with you, that every year we come back and talk about the same problem, but we are not seeing much improvement. One thing that one can say is that if you look back And you see that whenever there's a new leadership, in terms of political leadership that comes in terms of the financial that come out on that particular year, we tend to see a drop because with the new leadership comes, we don't expect much. One thing that is encouraging, if one were to see anything out of these results, is that we had the elections at the end of 2021, but when you look at the results that came out now, really, it's not very much different from what we had before. So we are saying that really we have to be encouraged at SACA point of view that at least this new leadership that came in was able to do things quite quickly than what we had experienced in the past. When you look at the numbers, I'll agree with you when you say, but they are not exciting. Indeed, they are not exciting. So, but we are able to see some light that the development and the support that we are getting from all parties is helpful.
All right, then. Thank you so much to our guests. That is Zamo Gwala as well as Zukiswa Kota. Of course, Zamo being from the SALGA offices, acting chief officer in the municipal finance department. And of course, Zukiswa there from public service accountability.